Sitting on my right is Lila Zanganeh, who's a writer and the author of The Enchanter. She has a wonderful interview done with Roberto Calasso in the Paris Review. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I would highly recommend that. She's also on the advisory board for Libraries Without Borders and is the chair of programs for Narrative 4. Sitting all the way on the left is Vikram Chandra, who's a fiction writer, and his latest book, Greek Sublime or Mirrored Mind, is on computer programming and pre-modern Indian literary theory. And he's one of the co-founders of the American software company Granthika, which can understand the logic behind what you write. Sitting in the middle here is Osama Manzar, who started Digital Empowerment Foundation, which seeks to institute universal digital literacy and digital access for all to build a more equitable society. He's also authored a number of books, one of them being Net Chakra, 15 Years of the Internet in India. Sitting on my left is Sudha Gopalakrishnan, who's the executive director for Sahapedia, and is one of the founding directors of India's National Mission for Manuscripts. Her books include translations of classical texts and original books relating to Indian art, including the recent Kutiyam, The Heritage Theatre of India. And last over here is Margarita Guerrero, who's the director of Bookwire Spain, the leading ebook and audiobook platform for Spanish and Latin American independent publishers. I think the conversation that we just witnessed allows for us to sort of go into like what is content and whether book as a physical product itself is all that matters in terms of the content that we read. So I'd like to sort of start with this idea of what is content. Does it have to be in a paper form for it to be considered like good content? And I'd like to sort of start with you, Lila, and sort of maybe you can go into a bit of share your ideas in terms of what you think digital content is and how the medium makes a difference in terms of how you approach your writing or how you approach a piece of writing.
Hello everyone. Thank you for your question. I feel the question is way above my head. I honestly don't think I'm very qualified to answer it. I can tell you that from my experience, of course the format and the platform makes a difference. We can't pretend that it doesn't. But in terms of the work that I'm engaged in, and the reason why I'm here this morning, I'm on the board of an organization called Libraries Without Borders, who tries to give access to books and to education to the most disempowered people all around the world, to children and to refugees and migrants especially. And in that context, we provide them with something called ideas boxes all over the world. And in that context, yes, the digital format is absolutely vital, because in the ideas boxes are not just board games, but also computers, digital books, computers, and so forth. So it's fundamental, and they get there. And one thing that we have noticed is that everywhere that we've brought these digital books, everywhere that we've brought these boxes, well, violence, even for instance in refugee camps, diminishes. So I think that's a very, very powerful sort of correlation. You know, you bring digital content with culture, with literature, and there's an immediate reaction inside the community in terms of violent and person-to-person interactions.
Moving on to Vikram. Vikram, your last book was on sort of connecting the digital with literary theory in that sense. Maybe you can speak a bit about like how you see digital content and how like that connects with like theory and ideas.
Well, so I think obviously in today's world we have what used to be the traditional media, which is to say books and music and film, which is now all delivered digitally and often produced digitally. But I would also caution us to not see the digital media making its influence felt everywhere. So if you look at a hardcover book, it seems comfortingly physical and traditional, but as we all know, it's been produced through a digital process, right? I don't think there's a single digital publishing house in the world today that does not do all its editing and its composition on digital platforms. And then as a writer, when I write on a computer, I'm also producing, in a sense, something that is meant for printing, but it is actually produced by digitally, right? And there's some really interesting research on how word processing has changed the nature of fiction and writing itself, right? So what the tools that you use change the nature of what you actually produce.
How does it change?
Well, for one thing, for me at least, it makes it easier to manage much larger amounts of information, to make more complex narratives, to not worry about changing stuff, right? Because I can branch out and try experiments and then come back. And then even things like feature films, right, which are shot on film stock. If you go to any studio in Bombay today to a film shoot, the traditional film camera now has a feed that leads off to a digital monitor on which the director is watching, and after every take, the actors will come and see what they just shot, right? Which is very different from even 10 or 15 years ago. I remember being on film sets and you had to wait 2 or 3 days for the rushes to come back. And this completely changes the nature of filmmaking in terms of rhythm, in terms of precision, in terms of aesthetics. And then on the exhibition end, and there will be some people of a certain age who will remember this, in India, if you watched a movie in a smaller town, in a smaller cinema theater, sometimes the image on the screen would look really muddy and dim. And that was because the owner, the proprietor of the cinema would turn down the intensity of the bulb in the projector, trying to save money, because those bulbs were expensive, right? And so in order to compensate for that, if you were making a big commercial film, you overlit everything, right? And that's why you have that horrible 80s, 90s look on Hindi cinema, where everything is flat, right? And now in the multiplexes, you're watching things that are shot on film stock, but you're watching them on big LCD screens, right? And so again, there's no way to turn down an LCD screen's intensity, so filmmakers are now able to experiment with lighting in a way that they were not before. So I think in today's world, everything that we do and make and experience is mediated digitally and comes through us in one way or the other in some sort of digital dimension.
Mm-hmm. I think we've sort of touched on two different perspectives in terms of how digital content can, one, be a sort of empowerment tool for a community idea, and one in terms of sort of how the creative process behind it might work. I'd like to jump into first sort of talk about the management and how digital content is sort of marketed and sold. And Margarita, maybe you can sort of talk a bit about that.
Yes, we were talking about content, and I think it's crucial that today both publishers and authors think of content in different and diverse formats. And when it comes to really market, sell, spread any content, any cultural heritage, I think digital has some advantage. The digital content and the digital distribution line has so many advantages over the traditional distribution that I think I really don't understand that still so many authors and publishers still haven't embraced the digital content as a possibility for their work. My point of view is territorially very far from yours, because I work in Europe and Latin America. But I can say both for Latin American publishers and Spanish publishers, talking about Spanish content, that the sales outside their local territories is 50%. So they sell 50% within their local territories, either Latin America or Spain, and another 50% outside. Obviously, we do have an advantage. The Spanish language is very widely spoken. There are 500 million Spanish language speakers, and we do share different territories. The European one, which is very small but a very large, Latin American one, and there's a very large Spanish-speaking community in North America as well. Obvious. We do have that advantage. But I strongly, very strongly believe in the digital format when it comes to spreading a cultural heritage and to giving voice to publishers that wouldn't be known outside their natural boundaries.
One of the beauties of digital content is that once you put it online, anyone can access it, and once it's online, the way that people can access it also changes, like from phones to laptops to using libraries and all that. What I'd like to sort of explore is maybe Sudha can talk a bit about how Sahapedia as a online free encyclopedia of Indian arts and culture is sort of like one of the emblems of what we understand digital content to be, of free, accessible content for everyone.
So now we are talking about a specific initiative of an open online encyclopedia that we started about 5 years ago in Delhi, based in Delhi. It is actually comes with a firm understanding that Indian culture, what we call as Indian culture, cultures, heritages, in its broadest sense, we boast about it saying that we are superpower, culturally superpowers and all that, but what exactly is it, and how much of it percolates down to the people who want to know about it? So this has been the impetus behind Sahapedia, to setting up of Sahapedia. Saha being a term that means together, linked up, unified, things like that. So it started from actually a group of young people who used to work along with me in the National Manuscripts Mission, where the textual heritage of India was being documented and digitized. But the problem that we had, this was about 10 years back, the problem that we faced with the digitization is that the terms of agreement were very much in favor of the people who hold custodies of these manuscripts. They wouldn't let us do anything with it, you know. So then there was no point in digitizing. It becomes just a process, and nothing happens after that. So this was one of the reasons why we thought an open online, whatever there be. There is a lot of dissent in public, especially in public institutions. They don't like to give out many of them don't like to give out information or even their knowledge, part with their knowledge. So to the extent that we could do that, we wanted to do. So in a way, it is like an advocacy, I would say. We try to do, and then maybe at some time people may be open for open access. So this is one of the things. Second, we thought that it is, for example, if we talk about any aspect, say Ram Lila of Ramnagar, it is not just a performance. There is so much behind it. There is a narrative behind it. There are stories. There is the whole Tulsidas Ramayana that is recited. The whole place is deemed as sacred in that one month that it happens. There are also people who do it. So how to bring in all these multimedia elements into this so-called encyclopedic resource, which is not possible in for print format. So this was another thing. And how to create different kinds of material that would cater to different kinds of people, not just experts speaking to experts, but also how to make it more interesting to young people, to education, to schools. So all these were the thoughts that behind setting up of this institution.
I think what we have here are like four very distinct ways of sort of approaching digital content. One as like a sort of way to build empathy, way to like build understanding. One as a creative process, one as a marketing and distribution channel for publishers, and one as like a free access idea for information. I'd like to bring in Osama into this conversation now, in terms of what can we do with this digital content as a tool for like greater human good? What's the idea behind the Digital Empowerment Foundation that you have, and what do you see in digital content?
So, yeah, I would like to share that for us, we see digital more as a technology which has evolved to match the human technology, which is oral. Every human being is a sound, and the voice, and the listening, and watching. So these are the three technology that goes extremely well with oral technology of mobile or interactive or digital. And what is fascinating about this digital technology is that it is as oral as the human. So it doesn't create a barrier of literacy. So if I want to use a digital as a medium for publishing, I don't have to become, so-called literate or educated or something like that. And most of the wisdom that we see over a period of time of history and culture and tradition, they all lies at the grassroots level with the people. And every person is a publisher or a writer or a singer or a performer. Unless the medium becomes a barrier, the person is unpublishable, something like that. So, I mean, for a person, I was meeting a person in Udaipur, and he remembered 250 songs. But the only way he can tell you is by singing, or by telling you, or by orally letting you know, not by writing. So for him, the biggest barrier is becoming, I mean, he's an illiterate person and almost like uneducated, but I find him the most educated person in the world, because he remembers and he carries, but it carries within himself. And digital as a medium gives him a power to transfer that, entire piece of content as a publisher. And that actually inspired us to create this foundation and see how digital because it's a democratic tool, it's participative tool, it's interactive tool, and it makes people mass publisher rather than a mass consumer. So in all other form of publishing, I feel that people, I mean, there are few publishers, there are few writers, and the rest of the people are either consumers. But digital as a medium, I find, is allows you to become a mass publisher, mass writer, mass, disseminator. And that actually is very, very empowering if we make this digital goes in many, many places. All the tools that you see in digital format has become less a tool of content and more a tool of publishing and more a tool of participative publishing, right from Facebook to, to Twitter, to any of the things. Now the publishers are becoming purely online. I mean, they don't have to really go for print. And the medium is digital, and when you say digital, it is print, audio, oral, video, everything, all format of a medium is incorporated into digital, and that's what makes it more powerful. That's what my point is.
In terms of the medium itself, digital could potentially be considered like equal access in that way, but perhaps like in terms of content creation, it's not. I mean, the person that you just talked about, for instance, he doesn't have the capabilities to do his own recordings. So like the medium in some ways limits how much, what a person can do with it. And at a different scale, like Vikram, bringing you into this idea of creation and the software that you're creating, do you think is digital going to be something that becomes more and more easy for people to produce because like you have a program that sort of allows you to write better in some way, or even if you can't like write properly, like the program will sort of correct your language for you in that way?
So, I mean, I think yes. Like Osama was saying, anybody with a cell phone now can actually make a movie, right? And people have actually done that. They've produced an entire feature film using a camera. And similarly with, if somebody writes a story, they don't have to go through a traditional publisher. they can now publish online. And there are actually people who are making other kinds of production. Singing, Justin Bieber, for instance, started off making home videos, right? And then he was picked up. But I think one of the great sort of educational stories for me for the last 20 years is that none of this has actually changed the structures of commercial power and cultural production, right? And what I mean by that is that the big companies, the big international corporations, for the most part, still control mass media, right? And when you make things, Bieber, for instance, gets picked up by a big record company, and then he gets made into an international star, right? And you can see this happening in different media all over the place. So the big hope for me when I first started getting excited about the internet is that, oh, now artists will find their patrons, and people will pay micropayments. Everyone who loves a writer will pay him 5 rupees, and I can make a living, and I don't have to depend on the publisher anymore. And that has absolutely not happened. That has not worked, right? So I think despite all the idealism that a lot of the 70s and 60s, 80s makers of this technology poured into all of these worlds, I think the truth is that big capitalism still wins 99% of the time.
Margarita, do you want to add something to that?
I would like to disagree, partly at least. You're completely right. The commercial power still is in hands of the big groups, but I think there is a digital empowerment for all the self-publishers. And Justin Bieber, for example, he wouldn't have been discovered if he hadn't been there. E.L. James, she wouldn't have been discovered. Some authors publishing on Wattpad wouldn't have a contract with a publishing house right now, and many, many others. And there are many success histories of self-publishing authors that even decline signing with a publishing house. So I think there is that advantage of disintermediation. We haven't mentioned that yet. And there is a chance, although, I mean, the dominant structures still remain the same, obviously.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree that I think the discovery part has happened, but I think that dream of artists, for instance, like me, being able to actually make a sustainable living from not having to deal with publishers, that I think doesn't work. And it's interesting to see the models that have worked are all advertising based, right? So there are kids making reaction videos, there are kids making movies, and putting them on YouTube, and if you amass a following of 500,000 followers, YouTube gives you a part of the advertising that they bring to you, right? So that works, but I think apart from that, I don't see much else going on.
Sudha, maybe you'd want to talk a bit about, because Sahopedia and the bigger idea that it follows, Wikipedia, are both like these platforms where people are just writing because they want to contribute something towards allegedly building a better, knowledgeable society in some ways. That is kind of like an idea of giving without having like real authorship associated with the content that you're creating. So what is that? How do you sort of approach that in terms of leveling the playing field in terms of content?
You're talking about the divide that is in certain languages and certain cultures as against some of the dominant cultures, right? Which has more content, and how do you bridge that aspect? That's one of the things that you may have wanted to say. Is that what you said?
Yeah, partly in terms of language as well as in terms of the author not needing to take credit for his work.
Well, if it's the author not needing to take a credit for the work, I think it works the other way around. I think we have to be very vigilant if it's in an open space that all the copyright issues, all the credits have to be there. And if it is, I mean, if those structures are not taken into account, then you are failing your, if you're not being open, you're not being online in that sense. Because anything may bounce back, any simple image that you have used unwittingly can come back to you, and then, you know, so that's, I think, we have to be, if it is in the open space, I think one has to be very conscious. If the author doesn't want to take credit, well, that also has to be said clearly. I think that's one safe warning to everybody who would like to do this. I mean, we have already, we have only been 5 years now. We've already had that kind of problems once or twice. I think that is a very big problem. But what I wanted to talk about is actually also the disparities between languages in terms of content creation. And maybe not just, so also some communities which may not, if it does not go from a down to top kind of a situation, I don't think what we talk about culture or any other thing will have any meaning. We already know that there are certain things that are more privileged and which has more presence. But how does one tap, when you were talking about the oral traditions, that the person who knew only knew 250 songs, and there are so many people like that. The success of such a platform, I think, would depend on how much undocumented and unwritten, so to say, material can come on to stay, be it any language. And coming to language itself, I mean, some languages like some of the South Indian languages, or not, needless to say English, which may have more than 90% of the content, I think better and better translation tools should come, and that's the only way that I think we can surmount the problem.
Thank you. Osama, do you want to talk a bit more about like how the digital content access and how we can get like languages that are sort of unable to like have access to the medium of creation or the medium of distribution, for instance, to be able to benefit from using digital mediums?
Yeah, you know, it's very fascinating because we work in villages with digital infrastructure, and most of the people ask that how do you start with the people who do not even understand English or typing or any language, and English being the most popular language for computers and IT and digital, we have seen that, you know, absolutely illiterate people catch faster digital tools than the people who are literate in any other language in terms of reading and writing, because they have to first learn and then learn. And it is also very intuitive from the perspective that they learn more from the peer group and more from the signs also, you know, because if there are keyboards, they also know that these are the 5 keys that if I put, something opens, you know, so, and then gradually it starts opening up. So I'm just saying that the barrier of digital as a medium or digital itself as a language is not as much as it looks like from the perspective of many other languages. That's number one. Number two, being oral again, it allows you to publish irrespective of whatever language you are. So you do not really have to, type in Hindi or type in Urdu or any other language, but you can also record the video, and the audio makes you go beyond orality. So this audio-visual thing becomes a very strong tool in terms of capacitating and in terms of empowering for those people who are being excluded because of either the language or the medium.
Lila, would you care to talk a bit more about how Libraries Without Borders, for instance, uses these digital tools in terms of allowing these kind of conversations to happen?
Sure, but I just wanted to say I love hearing these different perspectives, because I agree with you that there are some serious limitations, and yet I love your enthusiasm, and I think it's necessary, and it's certainly true that it's opening new alleyways that are fundamental to all of us. At the same time, I think I come from a very traditional and classical kind of education, where there's a part of me who always wonders. I'm a person of this century, so I feel that enthusiasm, and yet there's always a part of me that wonders, are we drinking the digital Kool-Aid? You know, to what degree is this affecting the ways that we learn, the ways that we handle knowledge? How much do we really know? And I agree, you know, if on the one hand, unfortunately the economic structures do not change that much, There are different ways in which artists get discovered, but the structures are still there. Those byways, those alleyways, the byroads, I mean, are open, but to what degree are the excluded coming in the centers? It's a hard, long path, and I think it's one that we need to take. But in terms of knowledge, strictly speaking, I also feel conflicted myself. I don't know to what degree. I think we've lost, my generation and the generations after me have lost a great deal of focus. We're extremely distracted. That affects the ways that we learn, that we read. I don't think we read as much. I think having so much content available makes us extremely unaware also of how to choose things that might be nutrients and might be sustenance. I remember for the Paris Review I had interviewed many years ago Umberto Eco, who had told me, I said to him, so how does one learn so much? And what do you think of the internet? And he was being partly facetious. He says, well, if we knew everything, we would be like the internet. We would be stupid, meaning there are no more ways of discriminating. And he was saying, in order to become a true knower, somebody who has knowledge, we also have to have, and he called it a stubborn incuriosity. Meaning you have to decide that you will focus on certain things. And he said the problem of trying to know everything or thinking that we can know everything, you become like the character in Borges, Funes el Memorioso, who remembers everything, knows everything, has access to everything, therefore he remembers nothing. Because part of knowledge is choosing, selecting, deciding what we want, what we don't want, and trying to focus. And it's not something, I don't preach about it because it's something that I struggle myself with every day, trying to think, how do I choose? What do I learn? So it's wonderful, but I also would like to put a little bit, as we say in French, un bémol, which is a little bit of also cautionary note, because I'm scared too. It's great, but I don't know what this train is going so fast, and I'm not sure what we're losing in this train either.
Osama, just going back to you, because this idea of specialization in terms of this digital world of multiple mediums. Going back to the storyteller that you had, who could only share his knowledge through his songs, that is in some ways a specialization, and also he's carrying a lot of history with him, and a lot of these stories are part of what makes him what he is and what makes his community what they are, and sort of tying in all of the things that we briefly touched about. How do you see us using the digital medium as a tool to sort of empower these people? At the heart of it, what is it that we're trying to do when we say we're empowering them? Are we trying to put them online, or are we trying to give them something more than just a YouTube hit?
Making them cashless. Anyway, so it is hard because it's a change of habit. Usually I work both ways. On one side, I'm a great influencer of digital empowerment at a grassroots level, but at the same time I also see that people are being excluded because of digital, extremely hard. I mean, for example, a poor person pays 250 rupees for a photocopy, for which you pay 75 paise, and on a daily basis, because he has to go far away and there is no other option than digital. His entire database is in digital. The biometric doesn't talk to Aadhaar, Aadhaar doesn't talk to something else, and so on and so forth. So, the database management of digital is so fragile and not connected that it makes you actually excluded rather than included. But having said that, the way I look at it, digital, I mean, one is that I see it that there is no alternative but digital. We have to go. It's a medium change. For centuries we had print as a medium, and and paper and pencil and that was a piece of technology. We always forget that that is also a piece of technology that we don't know. If I don't know how to use it, you tell me illiterate. So similarly, if I don't know how to use digital as a medium or a mobile, I become digitally illiterate. So certainly the medium-wise we are changing, the scenario is changing. So we have to incorporate it institutionally, you know, it cannot be just done in terms of individual access. For example, all the schools, all the you know, grassroots level organization, institution has to be incorporated into it. It has to go into the level of being treated as culturally incorporated rather than you know, as a technological adoption. So the cultural adoption of change of centuries of medium is not easy to adopt. You know, it's certainly not easy to adopt. And the reason why it looks like that it may take lesser time to adopt. I mean, even in India, even today, 40% of the people do not know how to read and write. That means almost 50% people do not read at all. But they are extremely knowledgeable people. You know, they have the history, culture, wisdom, and everything. But we don't look at them as educated and as literate. But I see that this medium propagation to all those people can actually create a mass level of knowledge of producer and consumer, and that's what I see. And this is going to take lesser time than what print must have taken over a period of century to be adopted by the masses.
I've been told that we only have 10 minutes, so I'll
ask you to be brief. So I'm so sorry. So I think we must see it as this division as much more fundamental and not really confined to the digital alone. What you were talking about that, because I think the question is much deeper. We have to understand that there is inequalities, and so the emphasis should be much more fundamental than that. For example, we must improve the quality of schools. The schools should have computers. So if we have to make digital much more widespread, I think we have to make it more into the thrust should be on education and other areas of development.
Yeah, no, I just want to add that I completely agree with you that we're going through a revolution. And what's interesting is that if you look back to the very early years of the print revolution, there were the same fears and anxieties, right? People, I mean, we look back and we sort of glamorize it as the explosion of knowledge, but print also caused an explosion of stupidity, right? So all the superstitions and the prejudices of the time got expanded. You can hear the great intellectuals of Europe at the time saying now anybody can get published, right? And they were terrified by it in much the same way that we are terrified by it now, right? And so it seems to me that we are going through another great churning, right? To use an Indian image, it's a manthan, right? And out of that, both poison and nectar will come, as we are seeing all over the world right now, right? I live in a country where Mr. Trump is inaugurating himself today, and in large part that's, I think, a digital victory, right? So I think we got both sides are happening at the same time.
I'd like to take some questions from the floor if there are any before we close this session. Yeah, the gentleman in the back.
Thank you. One small concern. As an author, I feel that when we digitize, somewhere we lose the copyright power. Like Madam was very rightly saying that, the authors are reluctant to give up the copyrights and all to get digitized. Reason was very simple. We started doing audiobooks. I'm talking about some 20 years back. And what we realized was that, audiobooks was a huge success in States. Here, what used to happen was one audiobook was sold and 5,000 were, multiplied within minutes. So how do we tackle that? This copyright issue for the author, because the author has to get paid for the sale of his books or for sale of his digital books. So how do you take care of the copyrights?
Just to paraphrase the question, he's asking how do you tackle like piracy basically when you produce one audiobook and then 20,000 get pirated. So how do you, How do you handle that?
I would take it to the very different level. I would say the entire IPR privacy itself is a privatized way of controlling things. In fact, there was a time when Wikipedia never existed, the free encyclopedia never existed, and then suddenly this evolution of knowledge access created Wikipedia. So I would say gradually this, like he was saying, is churning. You know, this churning will solve all the problems of the insecurities and the security issue, and the open source was never there. So now open source is in public. In fact, open source is more regarded than anything else. Similarly, the right on something, I mean, my voice is my voice, you know. You can literally recognize it, that it is not similar to somebody else's voice. So I think this, I'm a piece of technology. So similarly, if it is being recorded, it will, you know, easily, you know, Vikram is writing a code. It will actually differentiate between my voice and his voice, and it will not be seen as that you need a license to prove that my voice is my voice and my writing is my writing. So, you know, technology will evolve and find a solution.
Yeah, I mean, piracy, I think, is an issue that affects any cultural content, and it doesn't have to be with its digital format. So any print book is pirated as well. Anything in the internet is able to be pirated, but I think piracy from creating whatever you want to create in whatever format.
Any other questions? Lady over here.
But really, shouldn't all knowledge be open source? Because we've all got it from somewhere, and some idea is sparked off by another idea. So shouldn't all of the knowledge be open source? And why should it be copyrighted at all?
Any of you?
In my opinion, that's my personal opinion, I think the public knowledge should be open source. Public knowledge, by that I mean libraries, I mean museums, yeah, basically, yeah, public knowledge. That's obviously open source. There is a creation that's crafted by authors, that could be writers, musicians, poets, whatever, that I think shouldn't be open source because they have to be remunerated, okay? So I would make a differentiation between public knowledge and private creation.
I mean, as a writer, I just want to know how am I going to get paid, right? so if I have a king who's my patron, right, and he pays me to hang around and write poetry, fine, then I don't need, but given that I live in this world of capitalism, how am I going to get paid for my work, right? And I agree with you that there's something really strange about how far we've normalized this idea of ownership of knowledge, right? It's IP is a completely recent historical invention, right? It starts with the rise of global capitalism, and it's an attempt to control knowledge for the purposes of making money, right? But given that we live in the system, I mean, I have no idea how to solve it, right?
I just wanted to come back to what you were saying in terms of how much it excludes, which is something also so important to talk about when you talk about the price of a photocopy that increases because of what we know of the amount of time that it takes to get there. And I was thinking that one of the things that the founder of Libraries Without Borders always tells me is that in terms of the migrant crisis right now in Europe, for instance, one of the big problems that we have is access to information. So should, in a perfect world, if they had perfect literacy and they could have access to computers, they would know that the European Union actually has a law with regard to migration or immigration that you have 15 days to file for political asylum. Most of these people who are coming into Europe do not know that. They don't have access to the text, they cannot know it. So one of the things that we're trying to do is actually bridge the gap and tell them, you know what, if you can't read, we're going to provide you with people to help you read, we're going to provide you with laptop computers to make you know about these laws, and we're providing you with 2 pro bono lawyers from Yale Law School to help you bridge that gap. But that to me was such an incredible thing, thinking if only they could read and they could access the websites of the European Union, they would know it, but they don't. And not knowing has a tremendous price on their life. So that was my first idea, and the second is also something that has stayed with me and that I thought was profoundly interesting and disturbing as well. There's an Italian philosopher called Giorgio Agamben who reflects a lot about what digital is and what technology is, and he says, the thing is, a totalitarian regime limits the things you can do. There are many things they tell you what you can do, and therefore there are many, you have to abide by the rule of that law. He says the problem with the technological age is that it limits the things you cannot do. And I thought that was very powerful. Myself, I resisted for many years until 6 months ago when finally my old little phone broke. I didn't want a smartphone. And I thought, I can do this. And slowly I realized, people thought I was weird. B, I could not get a car in gigantic cities where I needed a car and there was no way of getting a taxi. I couldn't move, I couldn't communicate. And I was beginning to feel a real cost to choosing not to. So, those are all things that we need to talk to as we're trying to integrate our world and adapt to the revolutions where we've had, I love what you said, we've had very similar revolutions, but this is yet again a new one that carries many dangers. And I like this idea that we must think about what it limits us in terms of what are the choices. How much can we say today, I'd prefer not to? And can we still say it? Can we opt out? There's a price to to getting in, but there's a price for opting out as well.
Thank you, Lila. I think that was a wonderful way to end the session. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you all for being on this panel, and thank you all for being here.